trust to create an open, honest, functional, and cohesive team. Additionally, Beckie serves, of course, as a Chicago director for the American Club Association, the vice chairman of the board for Chamber 630, and facilitates a family business roundtable for family businesses in the Naperville area Chamber of Commerce. Now, I want to warmly welcome the lovely Beckie Hayes.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that introduction. And just a thank you to Martin and to all of ACA as well. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with you guys. And just want to say welcome. Appreciate you guys taking some time out of your day. Appreciate both the ACA members and any guests that we might have on the webinar today as well. And just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you do have questions, go ahead and type those into the Q&A section. When I get to the end of the presentation, I'll get a chance to go through and answer a number of questions. And then I did just want to give a quick heads up. This is being recorded, so you can filter that if there's any questions you may or may not want to ask, given that it is being recorded. So with that, I just want to make sure that this is an effective use of your time today. And so there's two objectives that I'd like to accomplish today to make sure that that is a good use of your time. So the two objectives are, number one, I want to just introduce you to a new lens to be able to look at your business through. And then number two is share some simple, practical, immediately usable tools that you can leave this webinar and begin to go put into place in your business this afternoon when you're done with the program. So with that, there's just the agenda that I'd like to use in order to accomplish those objectives. First off, as Scott said, my passion is helping business owners get what they want from their business. And so my goal also for you today is just to begin to define what that is that you want. And when I say your business, I recognize some of you are business owners, solopreneurs, some of you own a business with other employees, and maybe your business is your book of business that you are accountable for within an organization. And so I use that term a little bit loosely. Along with that, I'd love to share you a little bit of a glimpse as to why I'm passionate about the work that I get to do each and every day. I want to introduce you to a couple of frustrations that I see consistently amongst the owners of businesses that I work with. Along with that, I'd love to introduce you to 6 core components that, as you strengthen those, help to address and combat those frustrations that you face on the growth journey of growing your business. And then I also want to introduce a handful of tools, as I mentioned in the objectives, in each of those core components that as you strengthen those, you're going to help address issues preventatively before they actually come into fruition. And then finally, there's going to be a lot of information I introduce here today, so just use the filter. At the end of the session, I'd love for you to just have at least one tool as I walk through all of these that you feel like is going to address the biggest pain points that you are facing in your business right now, that you want to commit to putting into place to begin to gain traction within your organization. So with that, as I said, my passion is helping business owners get what they want from their business. And so what I'd love for you to do is take a sheet of paper, get a pen out, and just take a brief minute and ask yourself, what is it that you ultimately want from your business? And 2 requirements here. Number 1, it's at least 5 years or more out. And number 2, it's just one thing. And so with that, I find there's a lot of different things that business owners want. Not everybody wants to quadruple their revenue. Some people just want a little bit more balance and sustain the growth that they have right now. Some people want to make transitions to the next generation. What you want from your business is unique to you. So again, just take a brief minute and jot that down. And while you're doing that, I'd love to just kind of paint the picture and help you understand why I feel so passionate about the work that I get to do. So I was born into a family of entrepreneurs. My dad ran a business from our home throughout most of my childhood. So I grew up in a family business. Breakfast was typically having the conversation with the employees and getting them started on their day. I have a grandfather who was an entrepreneur, a number of uncles that were entrepreneurs, and I've spent the majority of my career in entrepreneurial businesses. And with that, what I've observed is there's really two different types of owners of businesses. One type is they're getting what they want from their business. They're happy, they're peaceful, they feel fulfilled. The other side is they're not getting what they want. And there's a sense of frustration. And from a very young age, I couldn't have articulated it at the time, but I had this question burning inside of me wondering, why is that? Why are some people getting what they want and some people not getting what they want? And how can you get to the point where everybody's getting what they want from their business? And so with that, the frustrations that I've observed both in my own career, more recently when I was managing a company that grew from 6 million to 25 million, what was I seeing? What were these frustrations that people were facing? And what I found is the people that are frustrated, there's these common frustrations, and I see it day in and day out on the growth journey of businesses. And so what I'm going to do is walk you through those frustrations. If you only write one thing down, don't write the frustrations down. I don't want that to be your takeaway at the end of the day. But these are things that I see consistently. So number one is a frustration around control. Lack of it, to be clear. And so what I often observe is people are feeling frustrated because they're feeling like the business is running them more than them running the business. They typically have an idea or a passion inside of their head of where they want to take the organization, but there's something blocking them and they're not able to control to get that outcome. The second frustration I see consistently is profit, lack of, to be clear, and they often are feeling as though I should be getting more profit based on what I'm seeing in the marketplace for all the energy and effort that I'm exerting, and I don't clearly know what I need to do differently to help increase those profits. Third is people. This is, and these are not in order of importance, but I see this is probably one of the most common frustrations that I see. It's frustration around their clients, around their vendors, and around their people. Sometimes at the leadership team level, that leaders aren't working together as a healthy, functional, cohesive team. Sometimes it's a frustration with the organization, the employees that are working within the company, but there's a frustration that people either aren't getting it, they're not doing what I asked them to, or I've told them 3,000 times and they're still not doing what I asked. Fourth is the idea of what I would call hitting a ceiling. So typically on the growth journey, a company's been growing year over year, they've been doing a great job, and then all of a sudden they're doing all the same behaviors, but they've leveled off and they've hit a ceiling. They keep doing the same thing they've been doing. They work harder, 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 faster, but they're not able to burst through that ceiling. I see the first ceiling typically somewhere between 3 and 8 million. They burst through that, they go through a growth journey again, and then typically somewhere around 10 to 15 million, I often see another. And part of that is there's a science to the growth of a small business, and you need to begin to shift the way that you manage the organization in order to effectively burst through those ceilings. And then the last frustration I see often is nothing's working. So whatever the latest book is, they come back to the business and they have everybody read it and they get all excited about it. They begin to put it into place, but it's not getting the results that they ultimately want. It loses momentum after about a month or so, and they're still not getting ultimately what they want from the business. Now, I introduce you to these frustrations more from a recognition standpoint. On the other side, on the journey of observing companies that are getting what they want, ultimately what we found is they had some commonalities in place that ultimately were helping them get what they wanted. So I want to introduce you to, I call it the EOS model, but ultimately it's 6 core components of your business that as you strengthen these components in your business, you're going to begin to break through those frustrations and begin to proactively get the results that you're looking for in your organization. And so in the context of this, if you can just envision your business at the center of this model. And as I mentioned, this is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can begin to put tools in place that help to begin to move that momentum forward. So the first one is what we call vision. And the word vision has been used a zillion different times. The way we define it is getting clarity starting at the leadership team level to what that vision ultimately is. I find it's typically not that people don't have a vision. It's typically that there's different variations of the vision across the leadership team and then ultimately across the organization. And so this is where you begin to bring clarity to what that vision ultimately is. And I'm going to go through and introduce you to these 6 different components first. And then I'm going to come back through and introduce these simple tools under each component that you, again, can begin to put into place as you leave the webinar today. So the second component is what we call people component. And this is where you go to work at getting great people in the organization to help you accomplish that vision. And the definition of great people is different for every single person sitting on this webinar today. And so part of what I want to help you do is help to put some definition around what does great mean for you and for your organization. The third component then is what we call the data component. And one of the amazing gifts that founders and entrepreneurs have is they're great at those gut level decisions and making decisions flying by the seat of their pants based on emotions, and it works. They get a successful business and it's amazing. But what we find is on that growth journey, especially as they begin to hire additional people, the data is becoming more and more important as a driver of the decision maker. And so as they strengthen that, they begin to make better decisions for the organization. And so if you can get a sense of what that looks like with that vision component crystal clear, the people, you've got great people in place to help you accomplish that. You've got data that you're managing your business by using leading indicators. You're creating this open, honest, transparent organization where anything that's an issue begins to really rise to the surface. And we believe that's a good thing because the issues exist whether you realize it or not. Identifying what those are is that first step to being able to actually solve them at the root and make them go away forever. And so when we come back through in just a minute, I'll introduce you to a couple of tools to how to begin to really solve those deep-rooted issues that are standing in the way of you accomplishing your vision. And we find successful people are just really good at solving their problems. The next component then is what we call the process component. And, you know, frankly, most small and mid-sized businesses, I typically work with companies with about 10 to about 500 employees. Most of the time, they don't have documented processes in place. I'm not talking about the detailed ISO 9000 certification kind of process documentation. When we go back through to the tools, I'll introduce you to a very high level 80-20 entrepreneurial approach to documenting those high level processes. And then lastly, the traction component. So we find a lot of great work is done around that vision component. Sometimes people have offsite vision building days and they define the vision, but if you don't have a strategic execution plan in place in order to put that vision into place, it typically fails and it gets thrown in a drawer somewhere. And I've seen that over and over again, sitting in business owners' offices where they'll pull out the document, it's got dust all over it, it's not been touched. It may have been a great vision, but they hadn't mastered the tools in order to execute it. And so with that, this is ultimately the journey that I take organizations on is whatever their starting point and their strength, we do it by percentage. So if you take an engineering firm, they're typically rather strong on the data and the process. Sometimes they've got an opportunity to grow in the area of people and really articulating that vision and getting the whole organization sharing it. So whatever the starting point, our journey is ultimately to get them to be 80% strong or better in all 6 of these core components within the business. As that happens, what we find is ultimately they begin to prevent issues from surfacing. So we're shifting from being reactive in the way that they're addressing their issues to being proactive and preventing many of those issues from surfacing to begin with. And it's a shift in momentum in the organization. Again, it doesn't happen overnight, but as you begin to do that, the transformation is part of what helps you burst through those ceilings. So with that, as I mentioned, what I want to do back now is bring you back around the model and then introduce you to these simple practical tools under each component. And again, these are tools that you can begin to go put into place in your organization as you leave the webinar today. So starting with this vision component, and just as a heads up, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the vision and the people component because I find clarity in those is really what helps to drive all the other core components. So with the vision component, the first tool is what we call answering the 8 questions. And so having a clear vision is getting to the point where all the leaders, the 2 to 7 people at the helm of the organization, are answering these 8 questions in absolute unison. And part of that journey is really having those deep-seated, sometimes passionate conversations where they're actually able to get to the point where there's alignment in the answer to those 8 questions. Once that happens, they then have a clear vision they can begin to take out to the rest of the organization. So what are these 8 questions? I'm going to highlight what they are initially, and then I'm going to dig a bit deeper into each one of these. So these 8 questions, they start out with the core values, the real culture or the personality of the organization. Number 2 is a core focus. It's that sweet spot of where they service their customer and do a really great focused job in doing that. It's their 10-year target. It's that longer term, and I call it 10-year. Most organizations choose 10 years, although I do see a lot of organizations, especially faster growing organizations, that look at a 5-year target. Instead, it's that 5 years or longer out. And this is where, when I was asking you that question about what is your 5 or more year goal and wanting to accomplish in your business, this is part of where that begins to take shape. And I'll dig into that a little bit deeper in just a minute. From there, it's defining, once you identify where you're going longer term in that 10-year target, is what's the marketing strategy on how to help get you there. And then number 5 is that 3-year picture. If you know where you're going either 10 or 5 years out, it's painting that clearer picture 3 years out. What has to happen in these next 3 years to confirm that we're well on our way to accomplishing that 10-year target. And then finally, once that 3-year picture is clear, you're going to be able to paint a much better and more clear picture of that 1-year plan of what has to happen over the course of this next year to ensure that you're 33% of the way towards the accomplishment of that 3-year picture. And then the quarterly rocks, all this means these are quarterly or 90-day priorities. And so we go on a journey of really breaking out your business into 90-day increments. We find that people just begin to fray and pull apart every 90 days. And so we bring them back together. We do a quarterly planning meeting. We evaluate last quarter's rocks or priorities or commitments. How did we do? What are our lessons learned? And then what are our priorities moving forward in the next 90 days? And then finally, the 8th question is just, what are the issues? Again, issues are obstacles, barriers, anything like that that's standing in the way of you ultimately accomplishing all of these other 7 things that you've just defined. So with that, those are the high level questions. What I'm going to introduce you to, and if you email me and you have an interest, I'd be happy to send you a copy of this 2-page document we call the Vision Traction Organizer. These shaded sections are those 8 questions that I just shared with you. So if you see in the upper left-hand corner there, we start again with those core values. And the term core values has been maybe overused. Everybody's heard about them. The first thing you do when you start a business, you're supposed to define your core values. Sometimes it's kind of allowed them to become a little bit trite, unfortunately, but we believe it's really important to define what they are, because they really do come from the core of the owners of the organization. And once you identify what they are, why you as a leadership team have been drawn together and just really kind of get each other, that's going to help paint a picture of the types of people that really resonate with the same things that are important to you. And so my challenge to you is, if you pull back out that sheet of paper, is take a minute. Maybe you've already defined your core values. If you haven't yet, take a minute and just jot down maybe 2 or 3 core values that really resonate with you as an organization. And we'll come back and utilize those in just a minute when we move on to that people component. One thing I want to mention, the whole purpose behind core values is not to have them plastered on your wall. It's not to have them sent out to the rest of the world to know how great an organization you are. Those might be a cherry on top, but if you don't have them defined and you're living them and you're hiring and managing and when necessary firing by those, they're not going to have any value plastered on your wall if you're not really embodying them within the organization. So that's the idea of core values. Number 2 is core focus. And so this is really where you're defining the why behind your organization. This is where the emotional side of it comes in. What's either your purpose or your cause or your passion as to why you're doing what you do. And then the second part of that core focus is really what's your niche? Where's the space, if you evaluate all your client base, where you do the best job and you're really flying in a zone that you're really energized? If you think about the sweet spot on a golf ball, when you hit that ball and you hear that great sound and it goes flying and it was seamless and didn't even feel like it was a lot of effort, it's that same concept. The combination of your purpose, cause, and passion and your niche is part of that really sweet spot on the golf ball. And really what this ends up doing is giving you a filtering and guiding mechanism on what to say yes to and what to say no to as an organization. You're getting all of your efforts coming forward, going after that really sweet spot of the types of clients, and you're really fulfilling the why behind what you do. The next section there, midway down the page, is what we call the 10-year target. And again, bringing this back in, some clients do use 5 years. The big important question is, where are you going as an organization? For some people, that's, hey, I want to sell the business. For some, and I see a lot of that with the baby boomers right now, or I want to transition the business to the next generation, or I want to quadruple the revenue, or, you know, it's maybe I want the balance in life to be able to make it to my son's soccer game at 3 every afternoon. Whatever it is, it's helping to define what's important to you and then beginning to structure the organization around helping to accomplish that. So my challenge to you is, whatever you defined as your 5-year or more goal, that's your starting point when you begin to paint your picture of what your vision is for the organization. And so here's where you'll kind of drop that in the context of this document. Once you've defined that 10-year target, it's then putting some more meat on it and saying, okay, so what's the message that we're sending to our ideal customer? Who is our ideal customer? And so there's 4 parts to the marketing strategy. The first one you'll see there is what we call the target market, or the list. And this is, if you could take a database and it could spit out all of your favorite customers where you've got the right margin, they're a pleasure to do business with, they're in the right sweet spot where there's not a hesitancy about being able to commit with a budget standpoint or a time standpoint. What does that list look like? If you can streamline all your marketing efforts towards that list, it's not saying that you might not have a client bigger, you might not have a client smaller, but you want to get consistency as far as the message you're delivering and who you're delivering it to. So as you're adding more salespeople to your team, you've given them a crystal clear view of who they're looking to talk to, what that list ultimately looks like. It typically incorporates a demographic, a geographic, and a psychographic standpoint to use as a filter. And once you've identified that list, part of what you're identifying from there is what we call the 3 uniques. Some people call this a differentiator, but this is ultimately just defining what is it that sets us apart from everybody else in the marketplace that's doing and providing that same service or product that we are in the marketplace. And, you know, there might be companies that do 1 or 2 of those uniques, but what are the 3 combined that sets you apart, that keeps you ultimately from competing merely on price, being the low-cost provider out in the marketplace, but really getting clear on those 3 uniques so that, again, your entire sales and marketing team is using those to communicate. Every marketing effort, every sales effort is communicating those 3 uniques to that whole target market list that you've defined. And then the third part of marketing strategy is simply, what is your proven process? And so this is a visual representation of the journey that you're taking your client through from the first point of contact through to continuing to be a happy customer and keeping them happy forever. And most companies don't have this in this small and mid-sized business space. It's one thing that can really separate you apart, but it gives you a typically color graphic journey that the clients are going through. And then the final part of that marketing strategy is just, what is your guarantee to that target market audience? what are their biggest hesitations about moving forward, and how can you help counteract that hesitation, remove that concern, so that it's a money back guarantee or whatever the case may be. I know for me, I give 100% guarantee to every client for every session that I do. If they don't feel like they got the value that I committed to them, they simply don't pay me at the end of the day. So whatever that guarantee is, having it defined and again, consistently communicated across every salesperson in the organization. And so as you shift over to the right side of the page, then the next section is what we call the 3-year picture. So once you define that 10-year target, you know who your target market is and who the sales and marketing are going after. This is where you start to bring that 10-year target down to the ground and say, okay, let's put some numbers to this. What does that future date look like? Let's put a committed date to make sure we're going to get there. What's the revenue, the profit, and what are maybe some of those measurables? How many employees are we going to have? How many different locations might we have? This is where you're beginning to paint a picture. And this is so key because I find most visionary founders of organizations, they see it in their head. They can almost taste it. They can feel it. They know where they're going. I've seen it happen in a session room, even amongst leadership teams, where leadership team members will just say, oh, I've never heard you say that. I didn't know that's what we were doing. I didn't know that was where we were going. And so there's just this disconnect where, you know, there's a saying that says, can you see what I'm thinking? And you can't. And so part of it is just really articulating. You often have to extricate it out of that founder, owner, or the leadership team of really putting some variables into place and translating it into, you know, how many widgets are you going to be selling at that point in time? Or how many employees are you going to be having? Or how many clients is that? How many locations might you have at that point in time? So they can begin to really see it in their mind's eye and get all the energy of the organization moving forward in that direction. So with that first page, we call that the vision page of the Vision Traction Organizer. This is the second page. It's just a simple 2-page document. And this really brings that 10-year and 3-year down to the ground, because if that's where you need to be in 3 years and that's laser focus clear, this just begins to define, then what do I need to do in this next 12 months to ensure that I'm 33% closer towards accomplishing that 3-year picture. And so again, future date, revenue, profit, and measurables, but we're going a step further here and saying, then what are those 3 to 7 most important priorities or goals that we must accomplish this year to ensure that we're moving the ball forward towards the accomplishment of those longer term goals? And so with that, I said 3 to 7. I have to say less is more. I find leadership teams, very talented leadership teams, they have 100 different things they want to accomplish in a 1-year time frame. I find the teams that have less on their priority list actually get more done. They're accomplishing more, and they're really flexing that muscle of long-term predicting of what the organization must do in order to move the ball forward. So less is more. 3 to 7 is my recommendation for a priority for the next year. If you go to the center of the page there, then what you'll see is, again, what we call rocks. This was a Stephen Covey term, but just really talking about what are the major priorities for the next 90 days. You put some clarity around your goals for the past year. Given that, what has to happen in these next 90 days to ensure that you're 25% closer to accomplishing that 1-year plan? And so this is future date, revenue, profit, measurables. You'll see an additional column on this side that says who. And so this is where we start bringing some ownership and accountability, starting at the leadership team level of what are those priorities that the owners, or the leadership team has to accomplish, and who's accountable for it. One set of eyes. There might be multiple people involved in the project, but one set of eyes that we're looking at to say, is it done or is it not done? And this is part of what really drives accountability across the organization. And then again, on the right side, you'll just see what I mentioned before. This is the concept of an issues list. This is a place for longer term, bigger picture issues you know are out there. Obstacles, barriers, anything that might stand in the way of you ultimately accomplishing that bigger picture issues, bigger picture vision. So again, I mentioned I was going to spend quite a bit of time on the vision, and I'll spend a bit more time on the people component, but I think it's really important to articulate this to get some clarity around what we mean when we're talking about the vision component of your business. So once the leadership team is 100% on the same page with the answers to all of those 8 questions, they've expressed their passion around it and they've gotten alignment, then they're at a place where they can begin to articulate it to the rest of the organization. So this is the point where you begin to roll it out and get it where it's shared by everybody in the organization. How do you do that? You got to tell them. And it seems silly, but most of the time it's not happening. So our recommendation is what we call a state of the company meeting. After you do your once a quarter, quarterly session for planning, you come out of there, go back to the whole organization, tell them where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, using that vision traction organizer really as a communication piece to help get alignment across the entire organization. So 100% strong in this vision component. All of those 8 questions are answered. Everybody in the organization is 100% on the same page, and they share the vision of the organization. So again, we've clarified what that vision component means. You can't accomplish that without great people. And, you know, Jim Collins did a lot of great work around saying, you got to get the right people in the right seat. And we firmly agree with that. And part of the journey that we help companies say is what does a right person look like in the right seat in my organization? And so with that, right people to us, if you go back to the work you did on that vision traction organizer, one of the things you put together was, what are my core values as an organization? And this is where you bring those back in to begin to help get them infiltrated into the organization. This is a simple tool. You can go and start using it today. We call it the People Analyzer. If you look across the top, you'll see I've listed 5 core values: humbly confident, grow or die, help first, do the right thing, and do what you say you're going to do. There's 3 ways that you can rate an employee. As you see, the employees listed on the left-hand side there. A plus means nobody is perfect, but most of the time, these people are exhibiting that core value. Minus means rarely, if ever, are they exhibiting the core value. And then plus minus means sometimes yes, sometimes no. And so you're using those as a grid to help it just identify what is it about this person that's really frustrating us? And just as an example, I had a client who had an employee that was driving them crazy. They couldn't quite put their finger on it. I pulled out the People Analyzer, we put the person into that tool, and the person had minuses across all of their core values. As soon as they saw it articulated, they had an aha of like, no wonder they're driving us crazy. They don't share the things that we hold dear. And that was just a discrepancy within the organization. So my challenge to you is take those core values, those 2 to 3 that you wrote down earlier, jot them across the top, maybe put your superstar employee on the top line on the left-hand side, and then put the employee that you struggle with the most underneath that, and then just use that rating system. Are they a plus minus, or a minus? And it doesn't mean they've got a target on their back. It does mean that this is a great tool to use for coaching and development as you're having those quarterly conversations with your employees to help them pinpoint the area with examples of where they're not exhibiting those core values that you hold dear. Now, all of that's not really valuable unless you define what is an acceptable bar in the organization. So you'll see across the bottom there, I have the bar. My recommendation, if you had 5 core values, would be 3 pluses and 2 plus minuses would be the acceptable bar. You'll notice there's no minuses in that. This gives consistency across your organization of what your organization accepts as an employee that does share the values within your company. So all of that is the right person meaning they share your core values, and the People Analyzer is the tool that you can easily use. And this works great in the hiring process as well, as you're evaluating candidates as to whether or not you're observing that they actually share the values that you hold dear. You know, that's not enough, especially in an entrepreneurial organization. You can't only hire based on core values. You got to make sure that they can do the job that you have them sitting in the seat for. And so what do I mean by the seat? The next tool I want to just introduce to you is something we call the accountability chart. Notice this is not the organizational chart, because we find that organizational charts really promote the idea of title and ego. We're talking about what are the 5 major things that I'm accountable for. And if those aren't happening, there's one set of eyes that I'm looking at, and that person's the one that's going to explain what's going on and what we're going to do to solve it. And so the fundamental beliefs really of this accountability chart is all small and mid-sized businesses growing ultimately have 3 major functions in their organization of some sort. So they all have a sales and marketing function, They all have an operations function and some type of finance function. And we go to work at helping to define and really customize what's the right and best structure to get you to the next level of it as an organization. Sales and marketing might break out into 2 separate functions. You might have 2, 3, or 4 operating functions. Finance might break out into HR, IT, admin. But at the end of the day, what's the right and best structure to get you where you want to be? And then the other real revelation was that there's this other role we call the integrator. And the integrator is the person that seamlessly integrates all the major functions of the organization. And they're really great at articulating expectations and holding people accountable. I find 50% of the organizations I work with look just like that. They've got the clear integrator in place and then all the major functions reporting up through that integrator. The other 50% have this additional role you'll see above that dotted line called the visionary. Visionaries are very different from integrators. And if you've got both leaders in an organization, it's just absolutely essential to articulate who's accountable for what. Typically, a visionary is big picture, great with external relationships. They usually have 20 new ideas on a daily, weekly basis. One of the root causes behind issues I see in growing organizations and a hitting of that ceiling is that visionary-minded person is trapped in that integrator seat. They don't love the details. They don't love executing the vision. They don't love the people accountability. And that's not where they're bringing the greatest value, but yet they're stuck in that seat. And that's part of the journey that I end up helping teams come up with the right structure. And that's a key component of it. Once you define what that looks like, it's identifying the 5 major roles of each of those different seats and then putting definition around, do they get it, want it, and have capacity for it? And this just simply means get it, the God-given gift to do the job and to do it well, want it, they jump out of bed excited about doing it, you're not forcing them to want it. And then capacity is really the training, background, and experience in order to do the job and to do it well. So then if you pull back out the people analyzer, you'll see 3 additional columns on the right-hand side, get it, want it, capacity. And my strong urging is you need yeses in each one of those categories. And then you can use this tools to identify, do they have the core values and do they have the right skill set to do the job? With that, there's really 2 major people issues I bump into along the way is you've got people that share your core values, but they're in the wrong seat. They don't get it, want it, and capacity for that seat. The question is there a different seat in the organization that might be a better fit? The other people issue I see is they get it, want it, capacity. Maybe they're a stellar salesperson, high producer, but they don't share your core values and they're chipping away at your culture in ways you don't even realize, both internally as well as externally, potentially to your client base. And I've seen that over and over again. So again, the rest is going to move a little faster here. Wanted to spend a bit more time on the vision and the people, but the data component is just simply taking the emotion out of the decisions that are being made and really translating those into leading indicating numbers. The first tool that I want to introduce is called the Scorecard. This is a high-level instrument. It's intended for the leadership team of the organization, and it just works like this. 5 to 15 numbers, high level. What's that measurable? Maybe it's proposals to prospects. Who's accountable for it? The head of sales would own that. And then what's the weekly goal? If you don't know what the goal is, you don't know if you hit it or not. From there, you've got 13 weeks at a glance. I have my clients color code each week as to whether or not they hit the goal. Green, they hit it. Yellow, they were close but didn't get there. And red, they were off target. In one glance, when you're looking across the board from sales and marketing to operations to finance to customer service, you've got the leading indicators to show you what's going to show up on that monthly or quarterly report that you should be running from a financial standpoint within the organization. Here's just a list of a handful of different scorecard measurables that you might include. The whole journey is ultimately getting alignment around your whole organization and getting a scorecard rolled out to the sales team, the operations teams, the finance team, the customer service team. So everybody's got some sort of what we call the second tool, a measurable. And there's alignment from every team in the organization feeding up to the leadership team scorecard. And they all get to see what success looks like in their role. They also get to see their role in accomplishing the bigger picture vision of what the momentum of the whole organization is moving forward towards. So again, you get that sense. You've got a clear vision. You've got the right people in the right seats. You've got numbers that you're managing the business by. You're getting to the point where you've got this open, honest, transparent organization and issues start smoking out. And that's good. Again, they're there. Whether you're identifying them, recognizing them, hiding them, or not, they're there. And so your first step, as I mentioned earlier, is just creating an environment within every team, the sales team, the ops team, the finance team. Every team has a safe feeling of it's okay to call out the issues in the organization, not to vent, not to complain, but you actually bring them through what we call an issue solving track. So you're teaching the whole organization how to use this system we call IDS. And it stands for identify, discuss, and solve. And this stems out of a realization that really talented leadership teams would get hit with an issue and they'd go right to discuss, and they would discuss the heck out of the issue, but never would they identify the root cause, and they didn't walk away with the solution. And so the very next week, they'd be talking about the same issue. And so my encouragement is to take that step back, identify the root cause. Is it a people issue? Is it a process issue? Is it a training issue? Then move to discuss, and you're going to shrink down the discussion time significantly. And then you're going to have a solution where one person is committing in the next 7 days to take an action towards the solution and ultimately bringing that solution so it goes away forever. Then we move on to the process component. And, this is where you bring efficiency and consistency to your organization. And frankly, the process is often most neglected in small and mid-sized businesses, but there's so much value. The first step is documenting what those high-level core processes are. And, when I'm talking about those, ultimately what I'm referring to is the whole concept of your people process of bringing people in, getting them trained and up to speed. It's your marketing processes for how you're generating leads and interest throughout the world, bringing those leads and interest and ultimately converting them into sales for the organization, and then handing it off to the operations to make sure that you're delivering that quality product or service to make sure your customers are happy. You've got the accounting processes for how you're managing that money coming in and flowing out of the organization. And then ultimately the customer retention policy for, again, what's the proven process or that core process of how you're making sure your customers are happy and you're going to keep them ultimately forever. So again, the first step is documenting them. But again, if they just get thrown in a drawer somewhere, it's worthless work. The second tool is really getting to the point where they're being followed by everybody. And you have that consistency, really franchise prototype. If you think of McDonald's or Starbucks, they're masters at getting to the point where the processes have been documenting. When you launch a new store, and you're going to have that consistent feel as a customer every time you walk in the door, regardless of where that Starbucks or McDonald's is. And then finally is the traction component. And so again, we find vision without traction is hallucination. It's absolutely essential to make sure that you're mastering the tools that help you move forward in executing your vision. So I referenced rocks before. This is where you're breaking the business down into 90-day priority increments, where you're laser focused around accomplishing what that bigger picture is, but what in the next 90 days absolutely has to take place to move that ball forward in your 1 year and your 3 year and your 10 year. What are those priorities? And you as a leadership team really strengthening that muscle of long-term predicting over the course of that first 90 days on the company's journey. Second, I should say 100% is where everybody in the organization has some sort of rock. They have less as they go further down the organization, but everybody's rock is streaming up towards the leadership team's rock. So everybody's aligned around what the priorities are, and they're making their decisions about how they're allocating their time based on those priorities. And then the last is meetings. Meetings. Most people hate them, and frankly, they probably should, because the majority of meetings out there we find are not productive. And it's frustrating to employees that really care about their organization and they really want to bring value, and that's why they don't like them. Of all the organizations, there's thousands of companies around the world that are running their organizations on EOS, and every single one of them uses this proven level 10 meeting agenda. It's a weekly 90-minute meeting at the leadership team level. And it works like this. You're transitioning from in the business to working on the business. So quick 5 minutes, go around the 3 to 7 people in the room, only 5 minutes altogether. So this is brief, but what's a good news business, good news personal. The scorecard, you pull out the work that you did. You've got the weekly number on there. You're glancing at the color. Is there any red? If there's red, you're going to drop that down to the section that I'll talk about in just a minute called the issues list. So you're not discussing it here. This is just 5 minutes. Are there issues on the scorecard we need to talk about? Drop it down if there are issues. Next is rock review. This is a little tap on the shoulder from that work you did in the quarterly session of those 90-day priorities. A quick 5 minutes, am I on target or am I off target? If you're off target, drop that down to the issues list. Again, you don't discuss it here. This is where you're bringing a measure of accountability to the leadership team. And then a quick 5-minute people headline. So customer, employers, employees, is there anybody maybe that's exhibiting your core values that needs a pat on the back or an email from the owner of the organization thanking them for going that extra step that should be highlighted? Next is the to-do list, and this is a living, breathing document, so it changes week after week. The to-do list is a 7-day priority that has someone's name on it that was committed to in the previous week's meeting. So in this 5 minutes, it's simply reading off what they committed to doing, the name of the person, and did they do it or did they not do it? If they didn't do it, it may drop down to the issues list for a further discussion. So quick 5 minutes accountability. Are we doing what we're committing to doing? And if you'll see here, what happened in being brief up top, you're now saving 60 minutes of the whole leadership team's time dedicated towards solving all those big picture issues that are standing in the way of you accomplishing your vision. And inevitably, I hear it over and over and over again, is people find so much value in these meetings because they're actually productive and they're going to the root cause and solving issues, making them go away forever. And from there, you're ultimately moving to conclude. It's a quick 5 minutes recapping the to-do list, who committed to doing what, asking if there's any cascading messages that need to go out to the rest of the organization, and then ultimately just finding out how would you as a leadership team rate how you did together in that meeting on a scale of 1 to 10. And so that's why we call it a level 10 meeting. It builds in an element of self-correction. If you're running a 6 out of 10 meeting, that's not an effective use of all the highest paid employees within the organization. What has to happen the next week to move that closer to a 10 out of 10 to make sure that you're doing a great job short-term predicting, solving those big picture issues as a leadership team for your organization. 100% in that component is ultimately where everybody across the organization is in some sort of meeting pulse. Further down the organization, it likely won't be every week for 90 minutes, but it's using the same flow. So you've got a place where they're using that issues list to ultimately identify and solve. They've got a voice about the issues that they're encountering, and you're helping to teach the whole organization how to go to root cause, issue solved there, come up with a plan of attack with accountability to make sure it goes away forever. I know I gave you a big picture fire hose. I think I warned you about that. My challenge to you is just of all those different things that I introduced to you, of the pain points you're experiencing in your business, which of those tools that I introduced could you go and put together, put into place in your organization where you'd get the most benefit from and begin to gain traction ultimately coming out of this meeting today? So again, that vision traction organizer, the accountability chart, rocks, the level 10 meeting, or the scorecard. My challenge to you would be to identify which of those would be the most valuable to you. So with that, I just appreciate your time today. Would love to open it up and just see if there's any questions that I might be able to answer. So it looks like there is, Sue asked a question, are the core values in the people analyzer always the same 5 for every business organization? That's a great question, Sue. The answer is absolutely not. No, it's going on the journey as a leadership team of identifying what your passions are. As an example, there's one company, it's a very hardworking company. They're the type of company that'll send an email out at 2 a.m. and they expect you to have read it and gotten the issue done by the next business day. That was one of their core values. They're a thriving and growing organization. And they found if that wasn't articulated in their core values, they'd bring some great people on board, but they wouldn't be checking their email to maybe 8:30 in the morning and be frustrated that the expectation was that they would have attacked that issue already. So that's just a kind of example. Every organization is different. It's really important that it comes from the core of the leadership team. So thank you for that question. Again, if you have other questions, go ahead and type those into the Q&A section. Be more than happy to answer that. Any other questions?
And of course, if you guys are, you know, I know some people are a little bit gun shy. Sometimes they ask questions in front of people. You guys are always welcome to reach Beckie directly. She gave her email address, and obviously it's on, you know, on this information. And it's on the ACA site if you want to do that. So don't feel embarrassed and feel free. She's happy to answer those questions too.
Absolutely. And if there's no other questions, I'll read something quick to you. Oh, it looks like Nancy said, can we share this recording with clients? Fantastic fire hose, loved all the details. Sure, absolutely. Would be happy to have you do that. So just to close off here, Gino Wickman wrote the book Traction. He received a letter from one of his clients, and I just want to share, it's a quick paragraph here. He says, Gino, as you know, over the past year, I've had some health issues with one of my sons. I've elected to move up to our home on the lake for the month of January with him. It will be good for him and me and his recovery. I tell you this because without you, I would not be able to do this, and know that I have an organization comprised of people that I can depend on in my absence. Of course, I will communicate with my leadership team during this time, but I feel completely confident and at ease that the operation will continue and not miss a beat. I owe this peace of mind to you. And so what Gino shared in that, and the reason he shared it with us, was it wasn't him. It was the fact that he had all of these tools in place. He had built out a leadership team outside of himself that shared the vision. They had a scorecard in place, and they felt comfortable making that transition. I've got a client that, you know, is transitioning from one generation to the next, and it was a tough transition, as it always is. But what they did is began to build out the scorecard, the core values. Everybody was on the same page. At some point, the older generation went on a couple-week vacation. It was the first time they'd done it in 30 or 40 years. And they said, I could do it because I know that the next generation shares everything that I'm passionate about. And frankly, they're probably better at doing it than I am. And that's been a great stepping stone for them to begin to transition out of the business and begin to kind of let go of the vine, as we like to call it. Looks like just a comment in there. So with that, you know, as Scott said, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. If you do have an interest, I'd be happy to email you a copy of that Vision Traction Organizer as well. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Appreciate you guys taking the time.
For sure. All right, if there's nothing else, and that will wrap our first official combined on the Chicago end ACA event. Fully, we'll look to hopefully do a few more of these, more informative, fun things for everybody. Do more. Come on, Ghosh. Then you do. I'm just joking. No, we'll find more people for sure. I'm not sure if they can pull it off as great as Beckie did, but we'll do the best we can. Thank you, everybody, for your time. Stay healthy and enjoy your week. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.